Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Russia says it has unlimited range missiles, Doomsday torpedoes, and hypersonic weapons that travel faster than facts. However, every time it tries to prove it, something explodes, usually inside Russia. It just so happens that the Kremlin's biggest nuclear achievements recently involve evacuation orders and Geiger counters. As its conventional forces bleed out in Ukraine, Moscow's nuclear rhetoric grows louder because sometimes, when you have no real strength left to show, you start shouting about the weapons nobody has actually seen. On this episode, we'll take a look at all the Putin's wonder weapons. Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The Russian military has doubled down on developing the technology needed for their next-generation equipment. One of these is the Burevestnik missile. A recent test of this missile has made an experimental project become reality. According to official statements from Russian authorities, the Burevestnik flew a distance of some 14,000 kilometers over a period of 15 hours. It therefore demonstrated that its claimed ability to avoid traditional missile and air defense systems is possible.
The result you have achieved is, without exaggeration, of historic significance for our people, ensuring security and strategic parity for decades to come, and one might even say, for the entire 21st century. The Burevestnik's range, as is well known, surpasses all known missile systems in the world.
The Burevestnik isn't the only new technology that the Russians have brought to light. The nuclear-powered underwater drone Poseidon was also recently tested. Much like the aforementioned nuclear-armed cruise missile, the Poseidon is able to operate at depths which allow it to avoid conventional defenses. Both Poseidon and Burevestnik were developed as responses to top-of-the-line NATO technology. Their development comes mere months before the expiration of the New START treaty, the only one left which contains US and Russian arsenals. What's more, it would not be surprising to see the North Atlantic Alliance be successful developing new tech of its own quite soon. What these new weapons are a sign of above all else is the new arms race which the world has found itself in.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. The Russian-American rivalry is one that defined the second half of the 20th century, when both superpowers engaged in an arms race unlike any other in history. In the 21st century, there have been treaties regulating their nuclear arsenals, but of those, only one remains.
The measures for the further reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms, or more commonly known as New START, is the last remaining treaty that regulates American and Russian nuclear arsenals. It is set to expire in just 4 months, and its future isn't as bright as many might have hoped. Russia says that it is ready to renew the treaty for 1 year, but so far the American side has not responded. Yet despite Russia's supposed willingness to continue the treaty, it is Moscow who had been flaunting nuclear rhetoric for the last few years and has invaded a peaceful neighboring country. What seems even more puzzling is that Russia suspended its membership of the treaty in 2023. The timing of Russia successfully testing its Burevestnik and Poseidon weapons matches the treaty's expiration. These arms do not fall under the agreement, which concerns weaponry such as ICBMs and heavy bombers. Russian authorities have dismissed the idea of adding them to New START's list. Both of these new systems have yet to be fielded, however, and any negotiations or extensions would benefit the Russian side, as it would give the Russians more leverage and buy them time. It could also potentially let Russia continue to tie the prospects for future strategic arms control to the outcome of its invasion of Ukraine.
And now, as always, it's time to explore this story in greater detail. If you want to understand Russia's mindset right now, picture a boxer who keeps losing matches but claims he owns a secret knockout punch he just hasn't used yet. That imaginary punch is Russia's nuclear arsenal. And the more battlefield losses the Kremlin suffers in Ukraine, the more it talks about unlimited range missiles, hypersonic glide vehicles, and doomsday torpedoes. And here is the real truth behind Russian nuclear threats. For every weapon shown on state TV, there are serious doubts, technical failures, limited production, and exhausted engineering capacity. Next, the Burevestnik missile. Part ballistic, part propaganda. It first saw confirmed use in November 2024, hitting Ukraine's city of Dnipro. However, its warheads were actually empty. It was more of a message than a military strike, really. The problem is that these systems blur the line between conventional and nuclear weapons, creating dangerous ambiguity. Belarus now hosts Oreshnik launchers on its own soil, bringing medium-range nuclear ambiguity very close to NATO borders. And when nuclear doctrine becomes flexible, escalation becomes all too easy. But perhaps the most spectacular case of Russian nuclear showmanship is the Poseidon, the so-called Doomsday torpedo. The Kremlin also just launched a submarine designed solely to carry the Poseidon. But if the torpedo itself truly had unlimited range, why would it need a submarine to carry it in the first place? That's the strange thing about Russian nuclear weapons. They always need another expensive system to make them work. Yet Russia's defense industry can barely keep the old systems running. The math just doesn't add up. But that leads us to the real danger. When Kremlin officials talk about nuclear weapons, they are often compensating for failure elsewhere. Russia's red lines keep shifting because Russia keeps ignoring its own threats. It has talked about nuclear retaliation dozens of times, yet not a single threat has ever materialized. And why? Well, because bluffing is the only nuclear capability the Kremlin can realistically and reliably deploy. In 2024, Russia changed its nuclear doctrine again. Now, Russia actually can use nuclear weapons and justify this not only by threats to Russia's existence, but also to its sovereignty and territorial integrity, including also that of Belarus. That means a conventional strike anywhere Moscow defines as Russian territory, even if it isn't, I mean Belarus is still an independent country, at least in theory, could trigger escalation. In the mind of the Kremlin, borders are flexible, so are definitions. And so, apparently, is the word existential. Nuclear power demands precision, discipline, and a healthy industrial base. Right now, Russia has none of those things. It has fear, however, and fear alone cannot deliver deterrence. It can only produce desperation, and desperation, like radiation, spreads fastest when it is unseen. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Colonel Vaidotas Malinionis, founder and managing director at the National Defense Foundation. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, thank you for inviting.
So there is a popular saying that Russia is never quite as strong or quite as weak as it seems. Would you say that this saying actually makes sense in the current situation?
Yes, I think Russia is always been pretending stronger than it is. It's normal approach. Of course, it's not a weak state, especially taken into consideration, the level its society can afford, level of suffering. I mean, yes, they lost over 1 million casualties in the country, but definitely they are not as strong as we pretend, and that is showing the stronger than they are. It helps them to achieve their goals. Yes, so then Western leaders are so to say hesitating to come up with the decisions, and also it plays along their hand this game, and this game is actually historically already proved that Russia historically never been a strong state, but they always pretend they are much stronger than they are in reality.
And how do you maintain a balance between the two? Because when thinking about Russia, on the other hand, we see multiple battlefield failures. We see the economy not really doing quite as well as Putin would have liked to. On the other hand, the fact is they still do have nuclear weapons. They often say they might use them in order to create this sort of sense of ambiguity. So how do you thread this path between hysteria on the one hand, which of course may cause the sort of self-inflicted paralysis, and too much optimism on the other?
Yeah, first of all, yes, you are very right, because Russia, anyway, it's not as strong as it pretends, but anyway, it has a nuclear weapon, yes. Although maintaining nuclear weapon also requires lots of resources, yes. and but nobody probably would like to check if it will work or will not, because it's of course dangerous thing. But bluffing with nuclear weapon is also, I think, they can also organize that, and they do it. I think they show that they have much more than maybe they have in reality, and the capabilities is probably not as good as we see.
Is this what these
for
doomsday
example,
weapons are for? Because Russia really likes to show off the so-called doomsday weapons, like the Burevestnik, for example, or the hypersonic glide vehicle that they are saying that they have designed, or the nuclear-powered torpedo with allegedly unlimited range. What is the purpose of actually putting these weapons at the front and signaling to the world, well, we have them, you'd better watch us, right?
Yes, but it's. I think it's a rule. If someone is bluffing, sometimes we over exceed with the bluffing. Yes, and you mentioned, nuclear powered cruise missile Burevestnik and drone Poseidon. I think it's a good example about the bluff. Which is overreaching and expanding to the reality. So those mistakes are probably not very. It's not a miracle they do that, because, for example, Poseidon, the nuclear powered drone, is designed to wipe out coastal cities like London or Washington or New York City with a radioactive tsunami. Yes, and actually Western experts are very skeptic about this particular drone because, first of all, the concept is very interesting, and there are much effective concepts, And of course, if it even will be operational, there is a lot of questions. It's a big and it's slow, so it's easy to track with NATO sonar networks. And if Russia launches it, the NATO countries will immediately expose it and expose intentions. So similar situation is with a nuclear-powered cruise missile, Burevestnik. First of all, it's a huge technological question, about nuclear reactor, which can, propel the missile endlessly. And of course, there are extreme heat management challenges, and of course, radioactive contamination during flights and testing. And we already know that this particular Burevestnik exploded during the test in Russia in 2019 and killed some engineers and bring some damage. So I think it's more propaganda, yes, and intimidation policy, which is sometimes over expense and doesn't go along the logics.
Now, someone asked an interesting question. What would this missile really be for? I mean, if Russia decided to launch it and say, look, it's already in the air, and try to use this as a pressure point, the question is, okay, so first of all, what if the threat doesn't materialize? They cannot really recall this. We don't know if it actually has any recovery mechanism, so we're assuming it would have to crash land somewhere, possibly exploding. It could be in the open sea, but still, you have the question of contamination. You have a nuclear explosion still happening. Another question that someone was posing was, all right, the potential adversary, meaning probably the United States, might not really be aware that this is not a missile that's intended to strike them immediately. Rather, it's intended to hover around, presenting this sort of lingering threat before possibly being recalled. They could say, oh, they are launching missiles at us. We need to retaliate. And it would launch, the US would launch its own missiles against Russia. Does the Burevestnik even make sense from this perspective?
I think not really, because it's enough, we have conventional rockets, which can use the nuclear weapons what we have. But this probably demonstrates that highest echelon in Moscow, yes, and Putin probably they pushes the engineers, the lower echelon, with the new innovations, and they want to press them, organize something very unique to intimidate West. And so they are producing some concepts and ideas and maybe even projects which Burevestnik, of course, it's already launched and financed project, but it's not really finalized and not if it will work, is very very doubtful. So they are pressing. They want to be better than NATO, Western countries, and then that's the reason they are creating stories which they want to believe. And they also if they believe it, they will also transmit it to us. But as I mentioned, experts says that Burevestnik, particularly nuclear power cruise missile, is too complicated. And first of all, nuclear reactor inside of the rocket is very complicated, and we know that normal nuclear reactors we require constant supervision, and it's really technologically probably even not feasible or not economically, even probably worth to use it, because there are more simple propellants and tools which they can use, and they have it.
Now, the Soviet Union was brought to the breaking point because of an arms race. Could the same thing happen again?
Well, arms race, yes, and space program, for example, also during Soviet period was an operation organized by NATO, by the United States, to involve Russia in the so-called fake competition about space defense program. And that also contributed, of course, to the diversion of resources which could go to the other more real, projects. And plus, of course, the economical, pressure, and war in Afghanistan also contributed, because society not only were losing, Soviet Union not only were losing lives, but also it costs a lot of resources. And we can see that in the middle of 80s, during the Gorbachev was trying to organize perestroika, yes, to reorganize everything, because nothing was working properly. And it led to the collapse of Soviet Union in the 90s. So we know already the history.
So do you think that the gradual change in the strategic thinking in the West, in particular in Europe, could actually bring Russia to a situation whereby it would need to engage in an arms race? I mean, Europe is rearming. Many say it's going way too slowly. Nevertheless, there are efforts taken in that direction. How do you think this confrontation is going to play out? Will this be an arms race? Will Russia try and do something before that in order to undermine the growing capacity of NATO? What could be the calculus here?
The arms race, I think, is a good strategy during the Cold War, yes. But right now, I don't think it's a Cold War. It's a very hot war, and Russia is destroying Ukraine, is attacking Ukraine, and plus European NATO countries will also receive hybrid attacks almost on the daily basis already. Yes, so I don't think it's we can name it as a Cold War and arms race, but definitely we need to expand and enlarge our productions. We need to invite Ukrainian expertise, yes, because war is the best laboratory where you can test newest technologies, yes. And plus, we should also understand that we should have very clear vision what and how we want to finish this war. And we will stay as long as it takes. I think it's the very best and very, no, not best, it's very the worst vision, what we are repeating constantly. Our vision should be, we must destroy Russia's war machine. And on this vision, we should unite and put all our effort towards this vision. Otherwise, we will be, walking around and thinking what we should do, and always our decisions will be lagging and too late. So we should be very clear that Russia's machine should be destroyed. And then I think after this, we can move forward with our resources, which we have a lot in European countries.
After all, Russia economically is dwarfed by the European Union, and that's something we should remember. Colonel Vaidotas Madelnionis was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you for the privilege.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a curated selection of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. China has saved billions on purchase of Russian oil since 2022. The heftiest discounts are the result of US sanctions on Russian oil, which drove prices far below global benchmarks.
China has reportedly saved some $20 billion on Russian oil since it started buying far more in 2022. Rosneft and other major Russian sellers have been offering hefty discounts as Russian oil revenues have cratered. These discounts have led to Beijing becoming the largest buyer of Russian oil in the world, supplying nearly 19% of China's energy imports in 2024, giving Russia a 20% share in China's oil market. This market share is without leverage, however, as while Russia gets cash, it gets far less of it than it normally would, spelling disaster for the country's finances in the future. Beijing isn't the only buyer, however, as India has also saved more than $12 billion on oil purchases from Russia. These forced discounts have amounted to an approximately $33 billion loss for Russian companies.
Russia has been turning its attention to Central Asia. In recent weeks, Central Asian countries have been trying to diversify their economic partnerships and step out of Moscow's shadow.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with Kyrgyzstan's President Sadir Japarov as Moscow is seeking to shore up its Central Asian alliances. Both leaders exchanged courteous remarks in which they emphasized bilateral cooperation and steady surging Russian business involvement in Kyrgyzstan. In recent months, Central Asian leaders have been balancing relations between not just the United States and Russia, but have also been doing business with other powers like China and the European Union. The involvement of Russia's rivals in the region is a blow to Moscow's prestige, as for decades it regarded Central Asia as its own sphere of influence.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.